Most people think animation studios are creative powerhouses that consistently produce magic. But here's the truth that nobody talks about. Every single major animation studio has created both a timeless masterpiece and an absolute disaster. And the gap between their best and worst work isn't just a little difference in quality. We're talking about the difference between films that define childhood memories for generations and movies so bad they nearly destroy studio reputations overnight. This isn't about good movies versus okay movies. This is about the extreme peaks and valleys that seem to be built into the DNA of every animation house in Hollywood. From Pixar's computer-generated worlds to Disney's hand-drawn classics, from DreamWorks' irreverent comedies to Studio Ghibli's ethereal masterpieces, the pattern is always the same. Brilliant creative minds working under the same studio roof, using the same resources, somehow produce both transcendent art and unwatchable garbage. What makes this even stranger is that these disasters often come right after the masterpieces. The same creative leadership and technical teams who craft scenes that make audiences cry with joy somehow also create sequences that make viewers cringe with embarrassment. Why does this happen? How can the same studio that gives us characters we love for decades also inflict movies so forgettable that even their creators seem to pretend they never existed? The answer reveals something fascinating about creativity, corporate pressure, and the impossible balancing act between art and commerce in modern Hollywood. Let's dive into the most shocking examples from the biggest names in animation. What you'll discover will change how you think about every animated movie you've ever watched. The story starts with Disney, the studio that essentially invented feature-length animation in the Art Deco movie theaters of 1930s America. When most people think of Disney's masterpiece, their minds jump to The Lion King, and for good reason. Released in the summer of 1994, The Lion King dominated box offices worldwide, eventually earning over $968 million globally across its various theatrical runs. The sweeping shots of Pride Rock at sunrise, the wildebeest stampede sequence, and Mufasa's death scene created some of the most emotionally powerful moments ever put on screen. The film's success wasn't just commercial. Critics praised its storytelling. The voice performances resonated with audiences of all ages, and the soundtrack by Elton John and Hans Zimmer became a cultural phenomenon. The opening sequence alone, with animals gathering at Pride Rock while Circle of Life swells, represents everything animation can achieve when artistic vision meets technical mastery. The hand-drawn animation brought the African savanna to life with a vibrancy that computer graphics still struggle to match decades later. But fast forward to 2004, and the same Disney animation department released Home on the Range, a Western comedy about 3 dairy cows trying to save their farm. The marketing campaign featured the 3 main characters standing in a dusty barnyard, looking as uninspired as the film itself would prove to be. Home on the Range earned about $145 million worldwide against a production budget of over $110 million, making it a massive financial disappointment for the studio. The movie was so poorly received that Disney executives used it as the final justification to shut down their traditional hand-drawn animation department entirely. The studio that built its reputation on hand-drawn characters like Mickey Mouse and Snow White abandoned the medium because of this catastrophic creative drought. What went wrong? Home on the Range suffered from everything The Lion King got right. Where The Lion King had a timeless story about family and responsibility, Home on the Range had a convoluted plot about cattle rustling that confused children and bored adults. The animation itself, while technically proficient, lacked the emotional depth and visual poetry that made The Lion King a masterpiece. The contrast becomes even more stark when you consider that much of the same creative leadership worked on both films. These weren't different studios. These were the same talented artists who had proven they could create magic, somehow producing something that felt soulless and mechanical under shifting corporate mandates. Moving to Pixar, the computer animation revolution that began in a cluttered warehouse in Richmond, California, we see the same pattern repeated with even more dramatic results. Pixar's masterpiece isn't just one film, but several, each representing a quantum leap in both technology and storytelling. But let's focus on Wall-E, released in 2008, which many consider their finest achievement. Wall-E opens in a post-apocalyptic Earth, where garbage towers reach toward polluted skies, and a lone robot continues his programmed task of compacting trash into neat cubes. The first half of the film contains almost no dialogue, relying entirely on visual storytelling and the mechanical sounds of Wall-E moving through abandoned cityscapes. When Wall-E discovers a small plant growing in a discarded refrigerator, the moment feels genuinely miraculous. The animation captures every detail of his curiosity and wonder, from the way his optical sensors focus to the careful movements of his mechanical hands. The film works on multiple levels. Children see a love story between 2 robots. Adults recognize a cautionary tale about environmental destruction and corporate overreach. The Axiom spaceship, where humanity has become dependent on hover chairs and digital screens, presents a frighteningly plausible vision of our technological future. Wall-E earned $533 million worldwide and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, cementing Pixar's reputation as the premier animation studio in the world. But then came Cars 2 in 2011, a film so misguided that it remains the most critically panned entry in the studio's history. The movie abandoned everything that made the original Cars charming, focusing instead on Mater, the tow truck, as he bumbles through an international spy thriller. The plot involves alternative fuel conspiracies, exploding race cars, and mistaken identity scenarios that feel more like rejected James Bond scripts than Pixar storytelling. Cars 2 earned over $560 million worldwide, but that success came entirely from international markets and merchandise sales, not from creative merit. Critics savaged the film, audiences felt betrayed, and Pixar's sterling reputation took its first major hit. The saddest part is watching Cars 2's opening sequences in the oil platforms of the North Sea, where the animation is technically flawless but emotionally empty. Pixar's animators could create photorealistic water, convincing underwater environments, and elaborate action sequences, but without the heart that drove Wall-E's story, all that technical skill felt hollow and manipulative. DreamWorks Animation presents perhaps the most interesting case study because their masterpiece and their most infamous creative valley arrived within a few years of each other. Shrek, released in 2001, revolutionized animated comedy with its irreverent humor and subversive take on fairy tale conventions. What made Shrek brilliant was its understanding that animation could be both funny and emotionally genuine. The scene where Shrek overhears Fiona talking to Donkey, misunderstanding her words about being hideous at night, contains real heartbreak beneath the comedy. Mike Myers' vocal performance gave Shrek depth and vulnerability, while the computer animation brought the fairy tale world to life with a distinctly modern sensibility. The film earned over $484 million worldwide and proved that non-Disney animation could compete at the highest level. Shrek's success spawned a massive franchise, but it also directly paved the way for one of the most cynical animated films ever produced. Shark Tale in 2004. Set in an underwater world that looked like a neon-soaked Times Square, Shark Tale felt like a movie created entirely by marketing executives. While it was actually a financial success, earning over $374 million worldwide, it remains a deep critical and reputational valley for the studio. The story follows Oscar, a fish voiced by Will Smith, as he pretends to be a shark killer to gain fame and fortune in the reef's equivalent of New York City. Everything about Shark Tale felt calculated and soulless. The animation style attempted to blend fish anatomy with the features of the famous actors, creating an uncanny valley effect that made children uncomfortable and adults cringe. Most damaging was the film's message. Where Shrek celebrated being different and finding genuine love, Shark Tale promoted lying, celebrity worship, and material success as the ultimate goals. DreamWorks had taken the subversion that made Shrek special and replaced it with focus group testing and market research. Studio Ghibli represents a unique example of this masterpiece disaster pattern because their rare failure emerged from a generational conflict. Hayao Miyazaki had created some of the most beautiful animated films ever made. Spirited Away, released in 2001, tells the story of Chihiro, a young girl trapped in a supernatural bathhouse. The film's journey represents storytelling at its most pure and powerful. It became the highest-grossing film in Japanese history, a record it held for nearly 2 decades until 2020, and has earned nearly $400 million worldwide to date. Spirited Away introduced Western audiences to animation that treated children as intelligent beings capable of understanding complex themes about environmentalism and growth. But in 2006, Miyazaki's son Goro directed Tales from Earthsea. The elder Miyazaki publicly opposed the project, believing his son wasn't ready to direct, and this tension bled into the final product. The film felt like a confused attempt to copy Ghibli's aesthetics without understanding the soul behind them. While it featured beautiful backgrounds, the story meandered through cliches. Where Spirited Away grounded its fantasy in human emotion, Tales from Earthsea felt disconnected from any authentic experience. It demonstrated that even the most talented studios couldn't guarantee success by following a visual formula without the guiding vision of a master. Illumination Entertainment, the studio behind the Despicable Me franchise, shows how even younger companies fall into this pattern. Their 2010 debut film Despicable Me succeeded because it combined genuine emotion with clever humor. The story of Gru worked because it grounded its absurd premise in relatable family dynamics. Despicable Me earned over $543 million worldwide and launched a franchise that defined the studio's identity. But success bred a certain creative complacency, leading to films like The Secret Life of Pets 2 in 2019. While Pets 2 earned $430 million, it was a massive step down from the first film's $885 million height. Critics panned it for being a sequel so unnecessary and poorly constructed that it felt like animated elevator music. The film scattered its focus across multiple disconnected storylines that felt more like extended television commercials than a cohesive narrative experience. The animation was technically proficient, but the heart was missing. It showed that when a studio prioritizes franchise maintenance over a solid script, the result is a product that feels mechanical and forgettable. What makes these disasters particularly frustrating is that they're often more expensive to produce than the masterpieces. Home on the Range cost over $100 million, more than double the production cost of The Lion King. Cars 2 had a larger budget than Wall-E. The studios spend more money and time creating inferior products, suggesting that the problem isn't resources but leadership and decision-making. The root cause is the perpetual tension between creativity and commercial pressure. The masterpieces typically come from passionate creators with strong visions who fight for their artistic choices. The disasters come from corporate committees trying to replicate success without understanding what made the original films special in the first place. Consider the difference in development processes. The Lion King's creators spent years researching wildlife in Kenya to capture the majesty of the savannah. Home on the Range's creators conducted focus groups to determine which celebrity voices would sell the most toys. Wall-E emerged from Andrew Stanton's personal concerns about human isolation. Cars 2 emerged from a desire to capitalize on international merchandise markets. This pattern reveals a fundamental truth about creative industries. Success cannot be manufactured through market research. The masterpieces succeed because they connect with universal human experiences, while the disasters fail because they prioritize commercial metrics over emotional authenticity. This doesn't mean commercial success is inherently evil, but when studios prioritize financial returns over creative integrity, they often achieve neither in the long run. The magic of animation represents a victory of creative vision over corporate caution, a miracle that exists when everything aligns perfectly. The disasters are simply the price we pay for a system that constantly tries to turn lightning in a bottle into a predictable assembly line. Consider the difference in development processes. The Lion King's creators spent years researching African wildlife, traveling to Kenya to observe animal behavior firsthand. Home on the Range's production, conversely, felt the weight of corporate mandates and focus groups designed to target specific demographics rather than artistic growth. Wall-E emerged from Andrew Stanton's personal worries about environmental decay and human isolation. Cars 2, while defended by John Lasseter as a personal passion project for international racing, was widely perceived by the industry as a calculated move to expand merchandise opportunities. The pattern reveals a fundamental truth about creative industries. Success cannot be manufactured through market research and committee decisions alone. The masterpieces succeed because they connect with universal human experiences, while the disasters often stumble because they prioritize commercial considerations over emotional authenticity. It is the difference between a story that needs to be told and a product that needs to be sold. This doesn't mean commercial success is inherently evil or that artistic vision guarantees a hit. But the evidence suggests that when studios prioritize financial returns over creative integrity, they often achieve neither in the long run. Home on the Range was a significant financial loss that effectively ended an era for Disney's hand-drawn department. Cars 2 was a box office hit, but it inflicted lasting damage on Pixar's once spotless brand. These disasters prove more expensive over time because they erode audience trust, making future original projects much harder to market to a skeptical public. The masterpiece disaster pattern also reveals how much animation depends on individual vision rather than institutional expertise. Animation studios develop incredible technical capabilities and deep industry relationships, but they cannot systematically produce creativity. The same talented teams that create masterpieces under one vision can produce disasters when working under different creative leadership or immense commercial pressures. The technical skill remains, but the soul evaporates. What's most striking is how the disasters often come immediately after the greatest successes. It's as if the studios, flush with confidence and under commercial pressure to capitalize on their hits, make decisions that directly contradict the approaches that made them successful in the first place. They abandon the creative risks and emotional honesty that crafted their masterpieces in favor of safer, more formulaic approaches that ultimately fail both artistically and sometimes financially. The animation industry continues to struggle with this tension today. Studios that achieve breakthrough success find themselves under enormous pressure to replicate that success quickly and predictably. But animation, like all art forms, resists systematic production. The masterpieces emerge from unique combinations of creative vision, technical innovation, and cultural timing that simply cannot be reverse-engineered or mass-produced on an assembly line. Understanding this pattern helps explain why some of our most beloved animated films feel so special. They represent moments when everything aligned perfectly. Talented artists with strong creative visions, studios willing to support unconventional projects, and audiences ready to embrace new forms of storytelling. The next time you watch an animated masterpiece, appreciate not just the beautiful animation, but the miracle that it exists at all. These films represent victories of creative vision over corporate caution and human emotion over commercial calculation. They are proof that animation can be transcendent art, even within the rigid constraints of Hollywood.